Moderator of WCC, and Reverend Frank Dieter Fischbach, General Secretary of KEC, Mrs. Katerina Pecrido, Program Officer for Theology and Studies at KEC, and Most Reverend Dr. Martin Modéus, Archbishop, Church of Sweden, and Chair of the Swedish Christian Council. So I think we all now long to listen to our guests, so we give the floor to you, and first to Most Reverend Stephen Cottrell, please.
Thank you. So sisters and brothers, it's a great joy to be with you. Let me begin. Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. They shall be called children of God, which I think means that we are most like God and most reflect the loving purposes of God when we too make peace, that peace which the world cannot give. But please note that it doesn't say, Jesus doesn't say, blessed are the peace lovers. Loving peace is actually a relatively easy thing to do, and many of us love peace. But making peace, making it happen, this is very different and much harder, because making peace is the intentional decision to reorder one's priorities as individuals and as Christian communities around issues of reconciliation and justice in our world. And it is when we make peace that we become God's children. As the letter to the Ephesians also makes clear, describing in chapter 2 the work of salvation as making peace. This reconciliation is first of all between us and God. Then it is between us and each other, and as Scripture makes clear elsewhere, between us and the whole creation. Thus, in the Church of England, where I serve, and across the Anglican Communion, and really importantly, and wherever possible with ecumenical partners, for surely, especially this morning, we all need to humbly acknowledge that this reconciliation and peace, which Paul calls a new humanity, must be between us. And it's our lack of peace with each other that sometimes blunts our ministry of making peace in the world. But Scripture also makes clear that this is something about climate justice, as well as peace between God, peace with each other. So there are three things I think we particularly are working on. Issues of climate justice, peace with the earth, conflict resolution, peace between the nations and communities, religions, ethnic communities of the world, and peace with each other in our homes, our families, and our communities. In the Church of England, we have particular opportunities as bishops being part of our parliament and our legislative processes. And this gives us a voice in issues such as peace in Ukraine and peace in Gaza, but also other really key ethical issues, not least to do with refugees and asylum seekers. My time is almost up and I've only started. So our world has become complacent. We have become a world where peace, particularly in Europe, has been taken for granted. All that has now changed. And it's not enough to love peace in an abstract way. We must listen to Jesus and take responsibility to be those who don't just talk of peace, but make it happen. The vested powers and interests of Jesus' own day experienced Jesus the peacemaker as Jesus the troublemaker. And I believe that those of us who are called to take responsibility for making peace today will be thought of in the same way. And is the church ready for that?
Thank you. Karin, please.
And welcome to my struggle as a church leader for Uniting Church in Sweden. Unity, peace, dignity, equality are linked together, we know that. And we know that this is a question for us inside ourselves, but also local and worldwide. Our name, Uniting Church, points to an ongoing process towards unity. We were formed with a clear intention of putting the calling to unity before other dogmatic questions. We state that Uniting Church is not the final goal. Rather, we are walking together towards a greater unity between churches. This in itself is a process of peace, both within our church and churches and in relation to other churches. We have roots in the Methodist, Baptist and Reformed traditions. We have historical roots in peace, non-violence and social responsibility. In recent years, we have made some statements in spirit of peace, both in relation to society and to creation. For example, inclusive church. We decided to be an inclusive church, welcoming everyone. As local congregations, we are called to be safe spaces where no one should experience discrimination. Climate responsibility. In response to the climate change, we declared a climate emergency some years ago. When addressing peace, we also need to address the urgent challenges of climate change. And in a month here, we will discuss at our annual conference how to take further actions in our local churches concerning peace and nuclear disarmament. In our theological foundation, it expresses very clearly, quote, "The congregation is present in everyday life, in working life, and in society at large. It seeks to defend what is just and expose what is unjust, to encourage participation and co-responsibility in society, to contribute to a fair disruption of the world's resources, to work for peace and reconciliation, and to assume responsibility for the stewardship of God's creation." One more thing I want to mention about our work. I think that the strongest contribution today is through our youth federation and the Scout movement, where young people are trained in peace building, social skills, responsibility, experiencing comfort in nature, and discovering Christianity. You know, it needs a village to raise a child. So then we have links to Gaza, Ukraine, Congo, you know, the whole world and all the war. And how to use these strong statements and our writings on peace in different areas. We still want more when we are doing. And sometimes I just want to reflect for 2003, I went to the Keck Assembly in Trondheim. And there were strong messages on climate, peace, equality. And I was quite young at that time, 20 years younger. And I felt that, well, now it's happening. We are going to change the world. The church are going to change the world. We have discovered this. But still, there are some steps to walk. Sometimes when I not feel happy, I feel like Lazarus coming out from the tomb. And I need Jesus to say, come out and take off the gray clothes and let us go. Sorry.
Thank you. And Archbishop Pace.
Okay, see. Good morning. Thank you for this invitation. First of all, I want to be very sincere because we are not in a diplomatic, so we have to be sincere in ecumenism. Sometimes in diplomacy are not sincere. So I am secretary of the department in charge for ecumenical relation. In the Vatican, there are other departments in charge for peace, justice. So I am not the right person to speak about the perspective from the Catholic Church, but I can offer some insight from my personal experience. You know, there is the Secretary of State in charge for diplomatic relation, and also the connection, the link with the Apostolic Nunciator everywhere in the world. We have a diplomatic relation with 184 countries, and so we have also ambassador to the Holy See in Rome. And they had this occasion to have private conversation, not only public conversation about some issue about peace and justice. And also there is the Dicastery for Human Development. It was the merge of 4 other Dicastery for migrants, for justice and peace. And so they are offering every year some insight to the Holy Father to send the message for the World Day of Peace at the beginning of January, 1st of January. And this is the occasion also to invite the politician, but also some ecumenical representative to celebrate together at the beginning of the new year, the civil year, the Day of Peace. Praying, but also offering some insight and some possibility to reflect and to act together on some issue, for example, artificial intelligence or some problem about the army and other things. The World Day of Peace was established in 1967, and the first day was celebrated at the beginning of 1968 by Paul VI. That is very important and interesting, because when I was speaking with my friend about the name United and Uniting Church, he explained me because we chose uniting because it's a process, still in process. The establishment of the World Day of Peace was a testimony of a process of understanding within the Catholic Church of the importance to be present also in the civil society about this theme, this social theme, peace and justice. So it's part of the process. And but with some clarification, Paul VI in the first message for the World Day of Peace say, I quote, "A warning must be kept in mind. Peace cannot be based on a false rhetoric of words which are welcome because they answer to the deep, genuine aspiration of humanity, but which can also serve, and unfortunately have sometimes served, to hide the lack of true spirit and of real intention for peace, if not indeed to mask sentiments and action of oppression and party interest. Nor can one rightly speak of peace where no recognition or respect is given to its solid foundation, namely sincerity, justice, and love in the relation between states and within the limits of each nation, in the relation of citizens with each other and with their rulers. Freedom of individuals and of peoples in all its expression, civic, cultural, moral, and religious. Otherwise, it is not peace which will exist, even if, per chance, oppression is able to create the external appearance of order and legality, but an unceasing and unpressible growth of revolt and war." End of the quotation. I am just finishing. So this offering a perspective, and the last thing is we cannot, as churches, act together, asking to the other to do something, asking to the civil power to do something, to change, to convert, if we are still divided among ourselves. Because we can is in like a hypocrisy. We ask the other to do something when we are still in process of division sometimes. So we have act on the external level, but as we are doing here, going on to act at the internal and the communal level to be very sincere and more credible to the world.
Thank you. And Archbishop Emerita Antje Jacqueline.
Good morning, and thank you very much. I was asked to focus on the theological dimensions of the theme of the day. And I will start out with a thesis. My thesis is, we need a new dialectic theology. The old dialectic theology, born in a time of crisis after World War I, is widely associated with the Reformed theologian Karl Barth, and the somewhat mean stereotyping of senkrecht von oben, vertical from above, and Offenbarungspositivismus. Don't even know what that is in English. But it emphasized the radical difference between God and humans and the discontinuity between human knowledge and divine revelation. This is not where I want to go with my thesis. A new dialectic theology, necessary in today's manifold crises, means focus on the relationship, not the difference, the relationship between global and local, between inwardness and outwardness. God's peace and lack of peace in the world require the Church to move from beautiful words about ecumenism to concrete action in a way that is global and combines contemplation and action, work and prayer. And of course, I found some resources for this in my own Lutheran tradition that comes across very often sort of couple-wise, in pairs. I mean, some of the most well-known pairs are the two kingdoms, law and gospel, humans as simultaneously justified and sinners, simul justus et peccator, God hidden and God revealed, the theology of glory and the theology of the cross, and so on and so on. It's always about the relationship between two poles. And sometimes the relationship is a both and, but there are also times the relationship is an either or. Like simul justus et peccator is both and, but theology of glory and theology of the cross is an either or. And good theologians have learned to handle these dialectics well. That makes a good theologian. Now, this new dialectic theology, I think, fosters a spirituality of coexistence, a spirituality of resilience, and a spirituality of hope. What does that do? Well, a spirituality of coexistence helps us to overcome borders that are harmful to our living and working together as one body of Christ, as one human family in this one creation. A spirituality of resilience makes sense of the struggle of women and men for the life and future of their children. It makes people draw God's peace into this world with words and deeds, be it words of prayer or words of advocacy for human rights, justice, and reconciliation, whether humanitarian aid or support for development. And a spirituality of resilience translates into resistance against the death-dealing ideologies and structures and counteracts the trends and powers that keep us from dealing effectively with humanity's greatest challenge. And finally, no peace without a spirituality of hope. And credible hope harbors at least three elements. It can harbor anger about that which is not right. It also relates wisely to both our strength and power and to our weakness and mortality. And in almost all situations, we still have choices. And hope chooses the path that is more courageous. And God knows the church needs courage these days. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we invite Vera to give a response.
Have we introduced Vera?
Yes.
Thank you, Jenny and Jan, dear Excellencies, dear President, dear brothers and sisters. It is a privilege to be part of this important discussion, and thank you for your engaging contributions. They give a message of hope and action. And listening to you, I could identify many common themes, but I will lift 3 of them. First, that peace comes from God, and that our task is to bring it to the world through blessings, through words of hope and comfort, through actions for justice and solidarity, and through raising our voices against hardening ideologies and injustice. Second, that peace is related to justice and love for one's neighbor. Archbishop Pace reminds us, quoting Pope Paul VI, that peace must be based on sincerity, justice and love, as well as, I quote, civic, cultural, moral and religious freedom. Meanwhile, apparent peace in the form of order and legality can be created by oppression, and yet, instead of promoting peace, it leads to revolt and war. Archbishop Jacqueline invites us to a spirituality and theology of resilience, which responds to the needs of our wounded world and offers hope, support, and healing. Finally, a third element you had in common was that the collaboration and striving for unity among Christian communities is a powerful and necessary witness to peace, and lends credibility to the Church's peace-building work. As Karin Wiborg says, the striving for unity of the Churches is already a process of peace. Your messages carry a call to hope and to become God's collaborators in spreading peace in the world. This leads us to a theme that already emerged in the Interfaith Gathering, and was also now mentioned by Archbishop Cottrell, that peace is something we do together. And that it is not possible to build peace in societies if we do not meet. Peace, in many ways, is relational. And there is no dialogue without encounter. On the contrary, remaining separated increases prejudice and polarization, while learning to know each other breaks down prejudice, increases compassion, and understanding of interdependency, encourages to act for justice. And God, who is love, is present when the parts care for each other. Meeting the other was already an important part of the Stockholm conference 100 years ago. The program included many moments of encounter and getting to know each other through different activities. And even today, religious leaders are doing quite well in this field. There are many meetings, panels, and joint declarations. But during this week, I have talked to some religious leaders, and I can sense somewhat a fatigue in this effort. Despite many efforts, things are moving sometimes in the opposite direction in our societies. Is it the lack of reception that Archbishop Pace mentioned? Therefore, I wish to ask, in your opinion, what could the churches do more to support their followers in developing greater interest in getting to know and even becoming friends with peoples from other churches, faiths, and cultures? I think of the notion of dialogue of life, which is certainly a precious path. But how could it be better supported by our religious communities? And especially, how could the younger generations, our future, be involved in it? For example, Could learning and practicing encounter with other Christians or people of other religions become part of the religious education offered by the churches as a witness to the message of peace and dialogue, which would also require better preparation for teachers and the clergy? This question came to me as I tried to imagine what our task of spreading and witnessing to God's peace in the world looks like in practice in a contemporary synodal church. Thank you.
Vera, for that response, and to conclude this first section of the first section of this panel, we will give the opportunity for the four of you if you have any immediate reflection on the response, if there is any immediate. Yeah, all right, Archbishop Antje first, and then Archbishop.
Okay, well,
Cottrell.
if I'm supposed to go first, a very brief answer or brief thought in response to how to inspire to do this. I think in line with my thesis about a new dialectic theology, I would say it can materialize in actually embodying our liturgy with the elements of gathering and sending. Again, there's this dialectic between gathering into the liturgy and sending from the altar to encounter in and with the world. And I think there's some dynamite in this, because too often, especially when it comes to young people, at least in my church, we have thought, if we can embrace them, that's good, then we have succeeded. And we haven't enough emphasized that the embrace is very important, but the embrace is also to empower them and send them. So gathering and sending, that would be my response.
Thank
you. So in some ways, building on that, a similar response is that I reflected, listening to you, Vera, that none of us spoke particularly about, nor me, none of us spoke particularly about the place of prayer within the work of making peace, witnessing to peace. And of course, blessed are the peacemakers is one of the Beatitudes, which I understand to be, this is how we live as children of God, which begins with a life which is lived in accord with God through prayer. And on a practical level, therefore, one of the most important things we could do in direct answer to your question is seek out opportunities to pray with other Christians. And it is something I have tried to do in recent years, though I still have much more work to do on this. But to actively seek out opportunities to pray with others will, I believe, make a huge difference.
Thank you, and thank you, Vera. Thank you for pointing out the young people, the children and the young. That's very important that we are raising together with them a new sort of person that taking peace and comfort in the nature as very natural. Another thing I think we need to, I am saying to myself, stay firm in belief, in prayer, in leaning on God and God's Spirit. I can't do everything, but I can stay firm in my belief.
I agree, especially with this last quotation. And thank for your synthesis, because peace comes from God, and what's interesting that the main theme is the church responsibility for God peace. Sometimes we are speaking about peace in a general way, but we are speaking about the gift is already done, gifted to us because the reason, Lord, say, my peace I give you, I'm giving. He gave his life, so we, the prayer and the liturgy can dip ourselves in this experience of the living one. Is the God of living one, is the living one, is the risen Lord, not the God of the past. We can offer in this perspective some sign that God can create new possibility to live together. This week is a very impressive expression I think in the Swedish society, because people in the street, in the subway, everywhere can see people together from everywhere and not only from Sweden, and because of the ecumenical journey they can stay together and stay together in peace. Sometimes we need the theological dialogue at very high level among our community, but not excluding the people from this dialogue. The theological dialogue has not to be a very VIP experience with people inside the church, not connection with the community, and we have community that they are facing this difficulty to stay together, and we are in the same country to dialogue in dialogue among us. And finally, offer sign inspiring the world. I remember the visit to South Sudan of Pope Francis with Justin Welby and the leader of the church in Scotland. Is the peace, a sign of peace for the country, but together, not alone.
Thank you very much for this first round. And now we look forward to listening to our next guests. Please, Bishop Dr. Heinrich Bedford-Strohm.
Thank you. I begin with a point that makes me sad, that I struggle with. And that is the fact that we as churches way too often just repeat what our governments say. How can we be the church? How can we make a difference? How can people see that we are the church? In Karlsruhe in 2022, as World Council of Churches, we have said the Russian invasion in Ukraine is an immoral and illegal war, and we have condemned those who legitimize wars with religious rhetoric. This is what we also say in each of our talks, for example, with our Russian Orthodox brothers. We decided to stay together, but we are very clear in the position that is the basis of our talks. That is our effort to make clear that we are the church. And it's unbelievable for me that we haven't been successful yet, for example, in Ukraine, to bring the two churches even together, leave alone a round table with the Russian Orthodox Church. That is a surrender, and I suffer under that. The second point, war is against the will of God. You all know that. It's the quote from Amsterdam, 1948, and it seems natural, but it is not natural. It has consequences. For example, when politicians talk about surrender and victory in the Ukraine war, for example, what is victory? This war is a surrender for everyone already now. So let's not talk about victory and surrender, but let's talk about overcoming violence and ending this killing. That is the second point. And the third point, even if military violence is only an impossible possibility, so it shouldn't be even a possibility, it can be the lesser evil. If it's the only way to protect people who are massively threatened by massive violence, even genocide, if this is the only possibility, it can be the lesser evil. International law must be the basis of it. To protect international law, one of the biggest moral failures of the second half of the 20th century is the genocide in Rwanda, where soldiers that had weapons but were not allowed to use the weapons watched while 800,000 people were killed with machetes in 100 days. That is a moral failure, which means it's not as easy here are the pacifists and here are the people who like military violence or something. No, it's much more complicated. And those who say it's no option for me at all to say yes to any form of military violence, they must answer the question what would have been right in the Rwandan case. That's how complicated it is. Fourth, I have 5 points and I'm good in the time so far. It was good that we overcame the just war theory and develop a just peace theory. But it is good to use the experience and the criteria of the just war theory for today, for our just peace theory. And the last point is using it, applying it to the principle of debitus modus. You could translate it with the principle of proportionality. That is a just war principle. The just war theory always wanted to limit wars, never wanted to justify wars. And let's take that one criteria as a last point. It's unbelievable how much this proportionality criteria is ignored in all of our debates. Look at the costs of military spending. 2.5 trillion is now the budget, the global budget of the military, and 1 trillion already only the United States. The NATO states altogether have 1.5 trillion, and Russia has 149 trillion dollars military budget. And now they talk about increasing military budgets everywhere. This is crazy with the amount of money that is already spent on the military, while 25,000 people are dying of hunger and lack of medicine every day. Every day. We don't even notice it anymore. And you cannot alleviate that everything of this with money because there are conflicts involved. But most of it can be reduced. And now they're talking about reducing the budgets for humanitarian aid and for development aid in my own country, United States, but other European countries. This is a complete ignorance of the principle of proportionality, just in terms of that money. And I would say we need to cry out. We cannot be silent with what is happening right now. Even if you say military violence, for example, for the defense of Ukraine is legitimate, it still is necessary to think of this criterion of proportionality and put all these things together and not continue to ignore the lack of money that prevents us from alleviating poverty and hunger and the death of so many people. That's it.
I
Yes,
just
please,
go on.
Reverend
Yeah,
Fitzpatrick.
thank you very much for the invitation to the Conference of European Churches, even for two from us, for KEC, allowed to speak and to contribute to this essential debate. I would like to highlight one main aspect, which is very much in line what you have spoken about. One main aspect with two questions, which KEC has and will have to deal with today and in the future. Since the war against Ukraine, and even more after the re-election of President Trump in the United States, security has become one of the most important concerns in Brussels and Strasbourg. Security is first meant here as a broad concept, also including, for instance, climate change. But however, at its core, it is about defense and the readiness of the EU and NATO to defend themselves against possible Russian military aggression in the near future. Since the last year, the European Commission has had a Commissioner for Defense for the first time ever. From 2021 to 2004, the EU member states have already increased their total defense expenditure by 30% to an estimated 326 billion euros. The European Union itself proposed to create a platform for enhanced defense cooperation to financially assist the member states with 150 billion euros. The Conference of European Churches, very often together with our Catholic partner in Brussels, the Commission of the Bishops' Conferences of the European Union, the COMICE, approaches the European institutions, the European Commission, the European Parliament, but right now also the Danish EU presidency, to resist the normalization of conflict, and instead to foster a new architecture for peace. Together, we underline that the European defense strategy should be integrated into a European peace strategy, which includes the readiness to defend itself, but at the same time strengthens the tools of peace building, conflict prevention, and peace diplomacy. And we might highlight also these days that this year we also celebrate the jubilee of 50 years of the Helsinki process, which has also started to overcome the gaps in Europe for a more peaceful time. Keck highlights the achievement of the European integration process after Second World War II as a peace project, which is of utmost importance today. The strength of law versus the law of the strongest. The appreciation of international order as opposed to a return to the national power politics of the 19th century. The priority of the rule of law, democracy, human rights, and self-criticism, which are deeply connected to our Christian understanding of the human being and human society. But speaking honestly, we also face questions that we have to address within our churches and in the ecumenical movement, and you have already raised it about our whole ecumenical movement, how it is for the moment, and also the divisions in Christianity which we are facing. And perhaps it helps to remind of Nathan Söderblom's peace appeal in 1914, in which he expressed, I quote, "We remind especially our Christian brethren of various nations that the war cannot sunder the bond of internal union that Christ holds in us." And I would add that we have to once again to live up this bond that Christ holds in us and our churches for peace. And this is especially true in a time in which we are witnessing a tremendous geopolitical change. What will Europe be about in the future when the United States are no longer a reliable political partner, when the Western world doesn't exist anymore as we knew it? There are right now more questions than answers in Europe, but I think and hope that Keck will serve as the ecumenical platform of Europe to contribute to this essential discussion. The updated Carta Ecumenica, which we will present soon, provides one opportunity to launch a fresh debate on a Christian understanding of Europe and of ecumenism in Europe today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Credo?
Thank you. Esteemed church leaders, dear friends, in my brief contribution I will focus on how the churches gathered in the fellowship of the Conference of European Churches have understood and expressed their responsibility for God's peace in the particular context of the Russian war against Ukraine. When the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began in 2022, the leadership of Keck discerned several reasons why it was essential to offer a coordinated response in the frame of the Pathways to Peace initiative. Number one, representation in ecumenical dialogue and the European political debate. Ukrainian churches had been largely absent from ecumenical dialogue, particularly at the level of official representation. This began to change when Keck welcomed the Orthodox Church of Ukraine into its membership and consistently extended invitations to all Ukrainian churches to participate in discussions concerning the war and the future of Ukraine. Similarly, the initiative aims to amplify their presence and contributions within the EU political debate. Number two, internal unity and the need for reconciliation. Churches in Ukraine participate in the All-Ukrainian Council of Churches and Religious Organizations, presenting a united front regarding the war. However, despite this cooperation, there remains a need for reconciliation among communities and for overcoming mistrust, misconceptions, stereotypes, also about ecumenism within and between the different Christian traditions. Number three, a challenge to Christian concepts of peace and reconciliation. The war has deeply challenged foundational Christian understandings of reconciliation, peace, and truth across Europe. Although the ecumenical movement has issued numerous agreed statements on peace since the 1925, the conference we are celebrating, the full-scale war revealed our struggle to articulate a common theological language in the face of violent conflict. Number 4, the role of church leadership in justifying the war. As senior leader and the broader hierarchy of a major Orthodox church has provided moral and ethical justification and theological justification for Russia's war against Ukraine, while promoting an anti-Western ideology. This has further complicated the ecumenical landscape and challenged the credibility of Christian witness. The Pathways to Peace initiative has 3 objectives. The first one is to develop a network of leaders, intellectuals and academics dedicated to preparing for peace in Ukraine. This objective aims to strengthen relationships between Ukrainians and partners, foster dialogue on ongoing developments, and discern the role of churches in the preparation for peace. Number 2, advocate for the protection and reconstruction of religious sites. This objective supports Ukrainian churches in rebuilding their religious infrastructure, contributing to the broad aim of ensuring freedom of religion for all. It does so by assisting churches in accessing European reconstruction funds. Objective 3, the overall frame of the initiative, enhance the ecumenical vision of just peace. The aim here is to facilitate theological reflection on just peace among European churches, strengthen their capacity to address narratives of exceptionalism and supremacy, and critically engage and examine theological justifications of war. We are currently implementing initiatives, concrete initiatives, under all these 3 objectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, Modéus.
Thank you. Dear friends, the question I would like to address is, as Söderblom, Bonhoeffer and others remind us, not merely what peace is, but how peace comes into being. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus does not offer abstract ideals. He calls us to a concrete path, to endure without retaliation, to overcome evil with good, through lives shaped by Christ. Peace is not a principle to be defended, but a life to be lived, a life in discipleship. So let me offer you 4 rather practical perspectives. The Church's first calling, if society is in peace, in times close to war or in war times, is simply to be there, to be there, to be present locally. As expressed in the idea of the priesthood of all believers, every Christian is called to live out their faith in everyday life. The Church thus offers a place, a table for dialogue, inclusion, prayer together even with enemies, and care for the world in all its dimensions, side by side with others. But the Church's presence must be real, empowering people to act for peace in all dimensions, trusting in God's renewing work in the world. The second calling is to stay at the table, especially when meanings and standpoints start being painfully different. Do not tip over the chair and walk away in anger. Do not exclude one another, but live the Church as perhaps the only place in this world where disagreement does not lead to expulsion or closed doors. Here we remain. We stay in conversation, in communion, even when it is difficult. That is our witness. In a world increasingly divided into camps of us and them, the Church must resist the temptation to mirror these divisions. Our calling is to break the friend-enemy narrative and explore ways of living together. We respond to God's call. even when it leads us into uncomfortable places. We must help people to reshape the narratives, not by demonizing, but by humanizing. Peace begins with a humble meeting with the other. Stay at the table. The third calling is to offer fresh water. In a broken world that thirsts for God's healing on so many levels, the Church has been entrusted with fresh water for the healing of the world, and we are all in need, not just they. Let us draw from the deep wells and drink ourselves, so that we may have the strength and courage to offer fresh water even to those that we have come to think about as enemies. The Word and the sacraments, the hope of the Spirit, the liberation of forgiveness, the service of our hands, and the invitation to all to contribute according to their gift. The possibility of prayer space is of central value, since in prayer we do not need to agree, but we can cry together in our division. The fourth calling is to make it easier to breathe. Throughout Jesus' ministry, we see how often he lifts burdens, helps people straighten their bent backs and take deep breaths, a message of freedom. We want to help one another find breath in our own lungs, helps to feel that the voice carries so that each person, at least in the next step, can speak for themselves and act on their own behalf. Liberation, affirmation, and empowerment are especially vital in encounters with the most vulnerable. So the path to reconciliation, justice, and healing requires patience and perseverance. It is long and not without setbacks. We need breath in our lungs, and we need to help others breathe more easily.
Thank you. And now it goes on to a response on these four voices from Dr. Mikael Hjelm.
Do you hear me? Yeah. Your Excellencies and dear brothers and sisters, this was more difficult than I expected beforehand. Peace, righteousness, equality, inclusiveness, justice are words that are used in this panel, and especially in the four last ones. Secular concepts that are used in theological framework. Carl Schmitt, during the 40s, he believed that most political opinions are rooted in theologies. I think he was right. But the 20th century has turned everything upside down. The secular arena produces its own values and ideas. And the churches are no longer the provider of these ideologies. But still, we want to be the major voice. And this is what I hear in the last four speeches. But one problem for me that comes very clearly and becomes very apparent is that, are it really that we should have this dominating voice as churches? The public theologians, Martin others in Georgetown University, realized it's not possible anymore. We can't dominate the public square anymore. Benedict XVI even sharpened it in his speech to the bishops in Brazil, which it's not even desirable to dominate the public square. And Laudato Si by Pope Francis actually highlights this idea that we have to equip the laity to be more independent from the church. The Lutheran Church in Sweden has experienced this change from being the dominating voice to be forced to reflect on a more humble approach. Still, the ecumenical bodies are very, very strong on being the dominating voice. And one sign of this is the fear to discuss the nation. Despite the fact that the wars that we see now in Ethiopia, it's a national conflict. In Palestine, it's a lack of a nation. In Ukraine, it's the right to have its own nation. Still, we work on a very transcendent level with values that doesn't address the present crisis in the world. So maybe we should have a more humble approach from the churches, and especially on the ecumenical bodies. That's my small contribution to this.
Thank you very much. And we invite you now, if you have any responses to what you heard, please, Bedford-Strohm.
Having worked a lot on developing public theology in my academic career, I have lots to say, but I will try to be short. I completely agree, of course, that churches are not dominating the public discourse anymore. We do not have the normative power of our societies in many of our countries. If we look at the world, the contexts are very different. But that is not at all any reason to stop raising our public voice in the most audible way possible, because we are part of civil society. There are many groups in a pluralistic society, and the idea of democracy is that these groups in civil society are allowed, participate in the public discourse, and really use that possibility that we have in democracies to struggle, to have this discourse. And why in the world would the churches have to be silent in all these issues if they can be based on a wisdom that is thousands years old in a society that's looking for orientation? Yes, we do not have the dominating voice, but we are necessary, we are important. And if you look at the institutions in society that even reflect about ethical questions, it's not easy to find them. And we have it in our DNA. Every sermon must think about what does this mean, what I say about God, for our life, for the way we deal with each other. So my experience is that in this world where people look for orientation, they're coming again, asking us, what do you say about it, about war, all these things? And we need to use the possibilities of democracy to support and strengthen democracy with our very precious wisdom that we have inherited from our fathers and mothers. So no, let's get engaged in public discourse and let's try to make it as loud as possible with the modern possibilities of technologies in the internet, with social media and all these things.
Katrina, please.
Thank you. I want to agree with Bishop Heinrich, and actually we use your work in our public theology frame, because being in Brussels, that's our mission, to actually advocate from the perspective of our Christian convictions towards the institutions. And I think here, the point is not that we want to be or we try to be the dominating voice. It's a fact that the Christian voice is not heard. The European institutions are secular institutions, and very often they're very aggressive towards any, not just Christian, but any faith perspective. So we are struggling for our place in this dialogue, and we need to create a place. For the moment, we have the Article 17 framework that somehow protects our space in the dialogue, but I'm not sure that this is going to stay with this aggressive secularization going on. And of course, for nationalism, we don't want to support this feeling, but at the same time, it is a fact that people want to belong to a nation. And I think the church needs to show what is a positive way of belonging to a nation, of having a culture, loving your country, but at the same time being open and not aggressive towards others. So it's the balance, I would say. Thank you.
Perhaps to go on in this line, coming also from Keck and the Conference of European Churches, I think our our task is really here not looking about how strong we are in the public sphere, but really to be a servant to the common good and the work in Europe and coming together like in Brussels, in Strasbourg. So like what you also said, I would like to underline that we also foster democracy in this way, that we come back with different, of course, discussions, different arguments about the topics in which we are discussing for the moment, that we have to foster these debates in a way that they are reasonable and that we are going on with arguments, and that what we see also for the moment is kind of polarization and extremism, that we there counter that in a way to establish a way of a reasonable argumentation and discussion which really supports a democracy debate in our countries and in Europe. I think that is something what we like to, or what we do support and bring forward in the work we are doing. And by this also, I think, what we in the ecumenical movement, but also I think and there we also should be grateful, I think, like the work of the Council of Europe and also in a way of the European Union, that these are organizations where, well, they are welcoming the nations and they are members of it, but it is transcending also. So it is not only anymore the nation as such, but they are in a structure, in an area of gathering, of coming together, cross-bordering the nations, the societies, and living together and shaping the future of Europe and in the world together. And I think that is something after the Second World War that we cannot highlight and estimate enough also as churches, and support in our work which we are doing, criticizing these or that decision, of course, but the way forward that has brought it, I think that can be really taken positive from our churches.
Thank you. Would you like to add something, Bishop Modéus?
I would like to hear what the audience says.
Right. So now we've heard responses and responses on responses, but we called it a round table, and Karin pointed out when you came that this doesn't look very round. But still, we want you to feel free to have the possibility to reflect on each other's, and maybe now we have divided you in two, maybe you have heard something in the other conversation that you also would like to get into. So please feel free now to take the word. And for example, we now in the end was talking about finding what is the appropriate voice in a time like this for the church. Maybe somebody would like to start in that end of this conversation. So please feel free to take the word. And since we are such lack of, we don't have very much time, we would like to make space for the conversation since we have such a broad panel. So this is what we will focus on, maybe not questions from the floor. Archbishop Antje.
Well, connecting to the response and to the statement on public theology, I would like just to draw attention to a study material that the Lutheran World Federation produced a number of years ago, The Church in the Public Space. And in the process of establishing that document, that has been helpful in situations where churches can feel like sort of majority churches and in tiny, tiny churches. It became really true. It doesn't matter how big the church is. What matters is that you do your analysis in society, and yet you identify what you can do, and that you do it, that you raise your voice. And I think, again, this drawing on this concept of a new dialectic theology, when it comes to nationalism, yes, we can affirm the longing to belong, but we can draw a very strong line between, say, nationalism and, say, patriotism. The patriot saying, I love my country, but I see others love theirs, and they have reasons for that. And in our time, I think, and especially in the ecumenical movement, where we also have many people who have actually a migration background, that we can draw on people who have hybrid identities, who know how to relate to several contexts, to several countries. And these often have I think, a more open and tolerant outlook. And we can learn a lot from them, and they can be really catalysts in the ecumenical movement and in public theology.
I just want to continue with what Antje said, because I think that is one of the biggest resources of the ecumenical movement in our public debates. We can be ambassadors of different contexts to our own societies, to our own discourses. And you have mentioned the most prominent example where you can show that nationalism. We can show also how in that specific question of nationalism, theology, spirituality, and politics and public witness are inseparably connected. I think still the most precise definition of what sin is comes from Martin Luther. Martin Luther said, sin is incurvatio in se ipsum, homo incurvatus in se ipsum, human being bent in him or herself. That's the definition of sin. It's a lack of relationship to God and a lack of relationship to your neighbor. Now, I think that you can also apply that to communities. There's also a communio incurvata in se ipsam. Communities can be bent in themselves. And that is exactly what nationalism is. That you see only your own nation, just as you said, and you don't see the other nations and their interests and their rights. And so it's a classical, almost classical example of what sin does to our world, does to human beings. And of course that has political consequences. Of course, when you believe that, and when you believe how to overcome sin, that means relationship to the neighbor, then you must stand up against these right-wing populist movements that want to tell you something different. I wouldn't know how I could pray and do all these beautiful liturgies that I love, but not act when God's face is beaten by people who want to instigate fears into societies, fears against others, especially against vulnerable people. How could we ever be silent with something like that? We would betray our faith if we were silent. So we need to engage in these debates because of theological reasons.
Please. Jan, you asked for what is the something like that. We, as church, as Christians, have tools for peace, justice, unity, dignity, reconciliation for all human and all creation in a broken and more terrifying world. So yes, we do have a possibility to a prophetic voice, I guess, and we should use it, but how? Some words I picked up here around the table. Archbishop Flavio, unity is a path to walk. Yes, it is. Unity. How do we unite in a broken world? The responder Mikael asked us to be humble. Yes, we know how it should be. It's time for God's peace, but how to shout it out, we don't know. I think that we got some interesting thoughts of Archbishop Antje, the new dialectic theological way, to find a new way of figure things out. And I also bring with me words from Archbishop Martin, more local view, the discipleship. It's about me and my life and how I put my life in a way to help others to find peace in a good way. Thank you.
to share. I think it's difficult to understand that a Vatican representative at the end of this meeting has more question than answer. Because my feeling is that we have to propose, but we have starting to confess our failure. Because the government approving the rearmy, military expenses, most of them are composed by Christians. We fail to form the person, to form the Christian, to form the community. When Archbishop Montini, late Paul VI, was named Archbishop of Milano in 1957, he launched a mission among the people because he felt that the problem of that time was the division between faith and life. And we are still in the same point, I think. And we had together, starting not only to ask to the other about peace, reconciliation, justice, with a courageous feeling, but sometimes with not humble position in front of the other. We have to stay at the table and to breathe together and to restart to form the Christian life, to live the Christian life, because the prophecy for peace and justice and future is to restart for community that live the gospel and can announce a new word, the possibility to live in a new way. We are discussing with the idea that Christianism is still the vast majority. Christianism, like my friend in the Middle East told me, is not minority or majority, is only a presence. Salt of the earth, light and salt. This is my question, and to pose to my church and to the other. We have to confess also to the failure of the presence of a Christian presence. We don't want to impose the Christian presence, the Christian view, but we want to serve the human beings because Christ became flesh. The Verb became flesh, so the Word became flesh. And so we have to restart. And that is interesting that the Synodal Assembly claim for a possible synod, ecumenical synod about evangelization. Because we have to restart together from the gospel, from Jesus, not only from the rule and to the... We can live the prophecy and then offer the prophecy.
I wish we would have a week to sit and listen to you, but this seminar unfortunately comes to its end. But we will give you maybe the most challenging task now for the whole seminar, that you will get one sentence each to tell us something that you take away from this conversation. So, who want to start? Can we start here and walk the table?
Yes, so this might be a sentence with quite a few semicolons in it. So they said of Jesus, he is one who speaks with authority. I'm never quite sure that's what they meant. I think they meant he speaks with authenticity, and authenticity is the greatest authority. And we live in a world where disagreement leads to division, and division leads to conflict, and the church itself has been part of that story, and that's what I'm taking away. That's what needs to change. That I don't think we listened carefully enough to your challenge, sir. That we, the church, have been humbled by our many failings, not least our failings to evangelize, our failures to pray, our failures to love, and therefore we have become part of that division leads to conflict story, and we need to embody a different story with much greater humility. Jesus said, "By this will all people know you're my disciples, when you agree with one another." No, he said, when you love one another. And that's what I'm taking away.
Thank you. Karin.
It's very hard to find a sentence, but I try. We need to walk the path, peace, unity, justice. And when we do that, how does it affect us as a uniting church in Sweden, as your churches, as an ecumenical movement?
Inviting at the table and living together the prophecy of the Christian life.
The topic of the day was the church responsibility for God's peace in our time. There's pressure on the church, there are pressures on responsibility, there are pressures on God, there are pressures on peace, there are many pressures in our time. What I take away is that we can see in the light of the gospel pressures as possibilities towards peace.
I take up the call to authenticity by Archbishop Stephen, and I would just add that we need to rediscover the source of our own authenticity, and that is Christ.
Take with me from here and from this week this word of Archbishop Martin Modéus to stay at the table and to explore ways to live together, because I think that is still a challenge in the ecumenical movement for the moment, but also in our political world, what we have to walk through and to serve to.
I actually loved the same expression, stay at the table, that the Archbishop used. And I keep that. And I also want to highlight what was mentioned. We need ecumenical honesty, and we need to be self-critical about our own complicity in violence as churches.
We need to live peace more than talk about peace. And that takes a lot of wisdom and prayer to find the good ways for that.
A very, very warm and heartfelt thank you to all of you. These applause really express our thanks, and we would also like to pray for you before we end. So let us pray together for our friends and for the church. God of peace, we pray for each one of our appreciated guests and for the churches and organizations that they represent. We pray that you will bless them with courage, creativity, wisdom, and patience to make peace. Bless them with your peace. Amen.
And we can say together the peace prayer from the ecumenical year, which is on the wall. God of life, in you there is always a time for peace. Come with peace where wars are raging. Come with comfort to those who mourn. Come with hope where faith falters. Come with strength where powerless prevails. Reveal to the world your path of justice and peace. Help us create spaces where the peace of Christ may reign. Amen. So thank you to everybody in the room for giving the morning to this session. And Sofia, do you want to say something to all of us or to some of us? Yeah, so we end here. Because... Yeah.
And the responders.
Yeah. Thank you. And why I asked that about Sofia is that I thought you were supposed to announce something that will happen now. Because of course we will meet you all in Kungsträdgården, where the festival will start at 11 o'clock. Yes. And at 10:30 there will be a procession for the church leaders. It's a bit stupid that you say it and then I repeat it instead of... But this is how we work. And thank you for being here, and see you in Kungsträdgården.